Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the session on land laws. In today's session, I will talk about here indigenous and tribal land rights in India. So welcome to this session. In my previous lecture, I had discussed about the women's land rights. I had given an overview of the importance of land rights for economic empowerment, for women empowerment, because women's economic empowerment is essential in promoting equality between men and women. Women's access to land is central to women's economic empowerment, and it can only be achieved through providing economic resources and opportunities and elimination of discrimination between the men and women. So in today's session, I'm going to talk about here the recognition of the tribal land rights in India and sustainable development. As this indigenous and tribal communities here I'm dealing with. What is indigenous community basically? That is here, indigenous communities are those that are native to a particular region or a territory and have a distinct cultural, social, economic and political identity. They often have a historical connection to the land, unique languages, traditional knowledge systems and customary laws. Tribal communities, because here I am delivering a lecture on indigenous and tribal communities. So tribal, it is very important. Basically, they are known as Adivasis in India. They are known as indigenous people, and they are distinct ethnic groups that have maintained their cultural, social and political system over generations. They often reside in remote or marginalized sections areas and have a close relationship with the nature, relying on traditional livelihoods such as hunting, gathering and agriculture. Because some of the characteristics of these indigenous and tribal communities, if I will mention here, that is, they have a strong connection with the natural resources to ancestral lands. They have a distinct cultural practices, languages and social structures. They have vulnerability to marginalization, discrimination and land dispossession. And they got legal recognition as well, because both indigenous and tribal communities are recognized by various international conventions and national laws for their unique status and rights and self-determination. In India, 705 ethnic groups are recognized here as scheduled tribes. In central India, the scheduled tribes are usually referred here to as Adivasis, which literally means indigenous peoples. With an estimated population of 104 million, they comprise 8.6% of the total population. So there are, however, many more ethnic groups that would qualify for scheduled tribe status but are not officially recognized, and consequently the total population of the scheduled tribes are higher than the official figure. The largest concentrations of indigenous peoples are found in the 7 states of northeast India and the so-called Central Tribal Belt stretching from Rajasthan to West Bengal. India has several laws and constitutional provisions as well, such as the 5th schedule is there for central India and the 6th schedule for certain areas of northeast India, which recognize indigenous people rights to land and self-governance. So tribals in India are an important part of the nation, and they comprised here 8.6% of the total population, and there are, however, many more groups are there which would qualify for these tribal communities for the scheduled tribe status, but they are not officially recognized, and that's why the population of the scheduled tribes are higher than the official figure. Now I will give an overview of the indigenous and tribal population in India. I'm talking about here the indigenous and tribal population. As in my previous slide, I had discussed that only 8.6% population ratio is there. So India as is a home to a significant indigenous and tribal population, often referred to as Adivasis, which includes diverse ethnic groups with distinct cultural identities and languages. According to the 2011 census of India, indigenous and tribal communities, approximately 8.6% of the country's total population, numbering over 104 million people. Because these indigenous and tribal communities are distributed across various states and regions of India, with significant concentrations in certain states, because the states with the largest populations, with the largest indigenous populations, which are here mentioned, like Madhya Pradesh is there, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, and Karnataka. So, in these states, the largest indigenous people are found. The indigenous and tribal communities are distributed across these states and regions of India. I'm talking about here regional variations. So, according to this, some states have a higher proportion of indigenous communities due to the historical factors such as forest cover, land availability, and historical patterns of migration and settlement. So, the distribution of indigenous and tribal populations series, and they vary basically significantly across states and regions, influenced by historical, geographical, and socio-economic factors. In context of socio-economic, the indigenous and tribal communities often reside in remote or marginalized areas with limited access to basic amenities or basic services such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure. They do not have these things, they do not even found these basic amenities in their livelihood. So, economic livelihoods are primarily based on agriculture, forest based activities, and traditional occupations, with persistent challenges of poverty, unemployment, and socio-economic disparities. Importance of recognizing diversity is essential here to recognize the diversity within indigenous and tribal populations, encompassing a wide range of cultural, linguistic, and socio-economic backgrounds. Policies and interventions should be tailored to address the specific needs and aspirations of different indigenous and tribal communities based on their unique context and challenges. Now, I will talk about the importance of land rights for these indigenous and tribal communities, because this is the only source by which they can maintain their life, they can live their life happily. So, the first one is preservation of cultural heritage. So, this land rights are essential for indigenous and tribal communities to preserve their cultural heritage, including traditional practices, languages, and spiritual beliefs. Access to the ancestral lands enable communities to maintain their way of life and pass down traditional knowledge to future generations. Economic empowerment, next factor is in regarding the importance of land rights for the indigenous and tribal communities, because by this land is a critical resource for livelihoods, and by providing opportunities for agriculture, for forestry, hunting, fishery, and other traditional activities. So, secure land rights, it enables communities to generate income, achieve food security, and reduce poverty. Land ownership basically it identified by this social cohesion and identity, because this land ownership forest, it provide a sense of belonging, it provide a sense of identity among indigenous and tribal communities, strengthening social cohesion and solidarity between them. It serves as a basis for community organization, decision making, and self governance. And next is environmental stewardship, because these indigenous and tribal communities often have a deep relation or spiritual and cultural connection to the land, leading to sustainable land management practices. So by this they secure this environment because they have a near connection with the land. Securing land rights, it empowers communities to protect biodiversity, manage natural resources, and climate change. I'm talking about here regarding their human rights and dignity, because land rights, we all know, are a fundamental rights, are a fundamental human rights that ensure the dignity, autonomy, and self-discrimination of indigenous and tribal peoples. So by recognizing and giving them protection, or giving them protection of the land rights, are essential for upholding the rights of indigenous and tribal communities to life, culture, and development. This also here secure sustainable development. By securing land tenure is a prerequisite for sustainable development, enabling communities to invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and other development initiatives. It fosters inclusive growth and empowers communities to participate in local and national economies. Now I will talk about the history of land dispossession in context of indigenous and tribal people, their colonial legacy and impact of this land dispossession on their life. So I will start with the colonial era. During the colonial period, European powers such as the British East India Company and later the British Crown enacted policies that led to the widespread dispossession of indigenous and tribal lands. Land was often seized through violent conquest, coarse treaties, and discriminatory land laws that favored colonial settlers and commercial interest. Now, what is the impact on the indigenous and tribal communities by dispossessing them from the land, and when the land was often seized from them by through violent or through coarse treaties? So these people, these communities, they faced displacement from their ancestral land, disrupting their traditional way of life and cultural practices. Loss of land resulted in economic deprivation, food insecurity, and marginalization, exacerbating poverty and social inequalities. Because the legacy which they had, which they continue to carry, this by being dispossessed from the land, it basically they have to struggle, they have to face the land rights disputes in India, because disputed land claims, unresolved grievances of their and unequal land distribution, it persists as enduring legacies of colonialism. Legal and policy framework which here have been done for these indigenous and tribal community, the colonial era land laws and policies laid the foundation for unequal land distribution and land alienation among indigenous and tribal communities. So by providing these legal framework, they basically want to minute these the things which by which they were dispossessed, by which the land rights were not given to the tribal people, to the Adivasis. So by providing these policies, by implementing these policies here, they made certain land laws and policies to lay the foundation for unequal land distribution. The struggle for land rights is rooted in challenging discriminatory legal frameworks and advocating for recognition of customary land tenure systems. The key provisions in the Indian Constitution protecting tribal rights, because we have certain provisions in our Constitution which protect, which gives right to the provide administration for the scheduled areas and tribal areas, for which we have Article 244, Sub-Article 1, which provides for the administration of scheduled areas and tribal areas in the country. It recognizes the unique socio-cultural and historical context of indigenous and tribal communities and aims to protect their rights and promote their development. By this Article 244, Sub-Article 1, it empowers the President of India to declare certain areas as scheduled areas which are predominantly inhabited by the tribal communities. It also allows for the creation of tribal areas within the boundaries of certain states where tribal populations have a significant presence. So, by providing this Article 244 here, it empowered the President of India to declare certain areas as scheduled tribe areas which are predominantly inhabited by the tribal communities. So, it basically allows for the creation of tribal areas. This article, here it is here for allowing the creation of tribal areas within the boundaries of certain states. Special provisions which are there in constitution is scheduled areas and tribal areas are accorded special provisions and safeguards under the constitution to protect the right of indigenous and tribal communities. Article 275 is there, which provides grants in aid to specified states for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes covered under the 5th and 6th schedule. So these are the special provisions which are made here under our constitution by giving them the right or specifically granting aid under the 5th and 6th schedule. These provisions here include autonomy in land governance, protection of customary laws, control over land and natural resources and safeguards against exploitation and alienation. Now I will talk about the educational and cultural rights of tribals in India. For this, we have Article 15, Sub-Article 4 in our Constitution, which ensures special provisions for the educational advancement of the scheduled tribes. Article 46, it mandates the state to promote the educational and economic interest of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes and protect them from social injustice and exploitation. Article 350, it allows the right to conserve distinct languages, scripts or cultures. So by giving or by providing or mentioning under the constitution this article, it ensures the provision for the educational advancement of these tribal communities, of these indigenous people. Now I will talk about the issues which were faced by the tribals in India, because there were many problems which were faced by them. As I had already talked about, they were dispossessed, the land rights were not given to them, and one major problem here which they were faced is the exploitation of their natural resources, because they were very much connected to the natural resources. So the government's policies of liberalization and globalization, it prioritizes using resources for economic growth, which clashes here with the traditional tribal view of resource utilization. This has led to the extraction of resources from tribal territories, causing ecological damage. So this is one of the major problem, because they have exploited, because they are very much connected to the nature. Their basic amenities, it come from the basically natural, by applying or by doing or having right or having attached to the land. So another issue which is here is forced displacement due to the large development projects. Many tribal areas have been taken over for these projects, and the displaced communities often struggle to find proper rehabilitation. Another issue which here is they were faced is forced displacement due to the large development projects. Many tribal areas have been taken over for these projects, and the displaced communities often struggle to find proper rehabilitation, because whenever there were such large development projects were there, so by which it basically displaces the person from their land due to these projects, and they displace the communities, and by which they face a struggle to find proper rehabilitation for them. Next is globalization. This problem is also they were faced, which has worsened the situation, exacerbating social exclusion and vulnerability for the downtrodden tribes. This has even led to subnational movements seeking greater autonomy or recognition for tribal areas. So, this globalization has also worsened their situation by exploiting this social exclusion, because this has even led to subnational movements seeking greater autonomy by recognizing, and they did not recognize here for the tribal areas. I'm talking about here about the tribal women. They are particularly affected as they are often directly impacted by the corporate exploitation of their lands. Poverty drives many young women from tribal areas to migrate to urban centers in search of work, where they face exploitation and poor living conditions. So, this has also worsened for them because it totally affected the tribal women, because they generally used to work for their living, for their basic requirement, for the food, for the right to life. So the influx of the immigrant laborers, I'm talking about here this point, the development projects which have also threatened tribal cultures and habitats. Some isolated tribes like the sentinels are hostile to outsiders and need protection from interference. Now I am going to talk about the scheduled tribes and other traditional forest dwellers. The recognition of the Forest Right Act 2006, because by the enactment of this act in 2006, it basically recognized and vested forest rights and occupation in forest land in favor of these scheduled tribes and other forest dwellers. It is enacted in 2006, and the main provisions, the key provisions in this act are: the first one is recognition of forest rights. So by recognizing the forest rights, they have here providing the occupation in forest land for these tribal communities, for these marginalized section of the society. So they provide for the recognition of individual and community forest rights, including the right to ownership, access and use of forest land and resources. So by these provisions, they help them out from by providing them the right to access the land, to provide opportunities for them to gain resources, to use the forest land, and provide them resources to live their life happily. So next is right of forest dwelling communities. This is again one of the key provision, because by it they recognizes the rights of forest dwelling communities to protect, conserve and manage forests and wildlife in accordance with their traditional practices and cultural norms. So it recognizes the rights of the forest dwelling communities to conserve their to manage their forest and wildlife in accordance with, as per their conditions, as per their traditional practices which they used to follow. Role of Gram Sabha is equally important here, because by this the Forest Dwellers Act, or this by providing the recognition of forest rights here, it mandates the establishment of Gram Sabha, village assemblies, as the primary authority for determining and vesting forest rights in eligible individuals and communities. Forest Right Act, which is basically enacted in 2006, it also prohibits the eviction of forest dwelling communities from forest land without their consent, and provide for the resettlement and rehabilitation of affected communities. So this is the main provision here by which the Forest Right Act, it prohibits the eviction of these scheduled tribes and the scheduled caste or these tribal community from de-alienating or from without their consent. They do not do these type of things with these people, and if they do so, then they have to provide resettlement and rehabilitation of these affected communities. Next is the implementation challenge. So despite its progressive provisions, the implementation of the Forest Right Act has faced numerous challenges, including bureaucratic hurdles, lack of awareness among stakeholders, inadequate resources, and resistance from vested interest. So, delays in the recognition and vesting of forest rights have led to widespread discontent and protests among forest dwelling communities, highlighting the need for effective implementation mechanisms and capacity building. So these are the challenges which there is a need for these type of implementation mechanisms and capacity building for providing them protection from the dispossession, from the bureaucratic hurdles, from the stakeholders by not providing the adequate resources. The path ahead and the impact of this Forest Right Act here is to ensure it has the potential basically to empower forest dwelling communities, promote sustainable forest management, and strengthen the right of indigenous and tribal peoples. As I had already mentioned in my previous slide, that although this Forest Right Act, it provides certain protections, recognition of the rights of this person to alienate, to hold the property. So the Forest Right Act has the potential to empower these forest dwelling communities by promoting sustainable forest management as well, because there is a delay in the recognition and the vesting of forest rights. So it can be done so by strengthening the rights of indigenous and tribal peoples. However, the concerted efforts are required to address implementation challenges, strengthen institutional mechanisms, enhance community participation, and ensure the effective protection of forest rights for marginalized communities. Now I am going to talk about the traditional land ownership practices among indigenous communities. What type of practices were there in the indigenous and what they have followed in their life, the indigenous and the tribal people, how they live. So indigenous communities, they often practice communal land ownership, where land is collectively owned and managed by the community as a whole rather than by individual households. So here, communal ownership is important with respect to their because by which they collectively managed, they collectively own the land, and then they get more opportunity for them by collectively do so. Communal ownership fosters a sense of collective identity, solidarity, and stewardship over ancestral lands and resources, because by this they create the relationship. Basically they bring harmony between them by collectively doing such type of works, by managing the land rights, by managing the or owning the land for their livelihood. Customary land tenure system is one of the practice which they had done here, which are very prevalent among indigenous communities, governed by traditional laws, customs, and governance structures that regulate land use, access, and inheritance. These systems are based on principles of reciprocity, mutual respect, and sustainability, reflecting indigenous worldviews and cultural values. So this is very prevalent among the indigenous communities, this customary land tenure system, because they governed by their traditional laws, their custom, their usage, and that regulate their land use, how to control them, how to access them, how they inherited these kinds of property. Next is intergenerational transfer. This is again one of the practice which is very unique among them indigenous communities, because land is often passed down through generations within indigenous communities, ensuring continuity of ancestral land rights and maintaining cultural connections to the land. Traditional practices of intergenerational transfer, it involves ceremonies, rituals, and oral traditions that reinforce land stewardship and conservation. So land is often passed down through generation by this traditional practice of intergenerational transfer. For they involve ceremonies, their rituals, they follow, they or oral traditions they reinforce against this conservation. Next is sustainable land management. Indigenous communities have developed intricate knowledge and practices for sustainable land management, including agroforestry, rational farming, and biodiversity conservation. Traditional ecological knowledge is passed down through generations, guiding land use decisions and promoting resilience to environmental changes. So, these indigenous communities have developed this intricate knowledge and practices for sustainable development, for sustainable land management, including this agroforestry, rotational farming, and biodiversity conservation. Collective decision making is one of the essential practice which is very prevalent among indigenous communities. This decision making regarding land use, regarding allocation and conservation is often conducted through participatory processes involving community assemblies, councils, or elders. So, while making such types of decisions regarding the land use, regarding the allocation, so they usually take help of their elders. They involve their community assemblies, and by mutually taking the decision here, they here conserve their resources. They are often conducted through this participatory processes. It is very essential regarding the land use. Consensus based decision making ensures inclusivity, equity, and accountability in managing communal lands and resources. So, this participatory decision making it ensures between them the inclusivity regarding the equity and accountability in managing the land or communal lands and resources. Next is resilience to external pressures. This is again one of the important practice here between them, between the indigenous communities and the tribal communities, because the indigenous land ownership practices have enabled communities to withstand external pressures such as colonization, land grabbing, and environmental degradation, preserving their autonomy and cultural integrity. Recognition and respect for traditional land ownership rights are essential for ensuring the resilience and well-being of indigenous communities. The types of conflicts here between the tribal and the non-tribal, tribal versus government. So there were so many types of conflicts regarding the land disputes, regarding the policy implementation. So various types of conflicts is there between the tribal and the non-tribal people regarding the land disputes. Tribal versus government. In this, conflicts often arise between the tribal communities and government agencies over land ownership, especially in areas designated as scheduled areas or tribal areas. Disputes may involve issues such as land acquisition for development projects, forest conservation policies, and encroachment on traditional tribal lands. So, these are some of the major concern here regarding the conflict between the government and the tribal areas, because for their projects, for their development projects, they acquire the land from these Adivasis, from these tribal peoples, and displace them from their land. So, this is one of the reason why there were conflict arises between the tribal communities and the government. Regarding second one is policy implementation, again because we have certain provisions, as I had mentioned, that in our constitution article 244 is there, article 15 is there for promoting education for the tribal areas. So regarding the implementation, because this major issue is also there in Forest Right Act, because proper implementation is not there. So differences in interpretation and implementation of laws and policies related to tribal rights, land tenure, and resource management can lead to tensions between tribal communities and government authorities. Inadequate consultation, lack of transparency, and unequal power dynamics accelerate conflicts over policy decisions affecting tribal welfare and autonomy. So there were so many differences in implementation and interpretation of the laws and policies related to these tribal and indigenous community. That's why the conflict arises there regarding their resource management. It led to tensions between tribal communities and government authorities. Regarding the types of conflict, so this is one of the reason here, resource extraction, because conflicts, as I had already mentioned, it may be conflict may arise whenever there is a land dispute, whenever they were displaced from their land by the government for making or developmental projects there. So this is again one of the reason why this resource extraction from these communities, from these indigenous people, because conflicts often arise between tribal communities and non-tribal entities, including industries, mining companies, and settlers over the exploitation of natural resources on tribal lands. Disputes may involve such as illegal logging, mining operations, water diversion projects, and pollution of traditional tribal territories, because they are very much connected to the natural resources. So by these illegal logging or by these mining operations there, they create pollution there, and it becomes miserable for them to live there in tribal territories in certain conditions. Next conflict which arises here is regarding the land grabbing and encroachment by the government by the non-tribal people. So the non-tribal individuals or groups may attempt to usurp tribal lands through illegal encroachment, land grabbing, or fraudulent land transactions, leading to confrontations and disputes. Rapid urbanization, infrastructure development, and expansion of agricultural lands often result in the displacement and marginalization of tribal communities. So these non-tribal communities or groups, they made attempt here to usurp these tribal lands through illegal encroachment, through illegal methods, by land grabbing and by fraudulent land transactions. So this is again one of the reasons which may arise here, and there is a conflict between the tribal and non-tribal people. Next is cultural and identity clashes. Cultural and identity clashes may occur between tribal and non-tribal communities due to the differences in customs, traditions, and socio-economic aspirations. Conflicts may arise over issues such as language rights, religious practices, social norms, and access to resources, exacerbating inter-community tensions. So again, this is one of the reasons why there is a conflict between tribal and non-tribal, because one of the reason is language. They may not understand the language if they come here from the northeast region in Delhi, and they do not know these local languages, these, because they have their own language, they have their social norms, they have their own religious practices, so it is very difficult to survive in other states for them. Now I am going to talk about the legal framework for resolving land disputes, because whenever there is a conflict, the case goes before the court. Whenever the conflict arises between the tribal and the government, between the tribal and the non-tribal individual or a group of or community, then they if there is a conflict, but obvious they have to fight for their rights, and they have to go before the court for the remedy. So for this we have a judicial system which plays a crucial role in resolving land disputes through courts, tribunals, and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, because we have a certain hierarchy of courts, like where civil suits will be entertained only by the district court, and then we have high court, and we have the provision of appeal before the Supreme Court, before the High Court. Litigants can seek legal remedies for land related grievances, including encroachment, eviction, title disputes, and violation of land rights. So sometimes they may not go to file a case, but they go for the other alternative. They talk about their situation with the other people, with the non-tribal people, if they want to maintain relationships. So for that, this is the best one, the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Land laws and acts again play a very important role in resolving land disputes, because we have various laws, because land rights are not given in a single legislation. There are various laws which govern and which regulate these land rights, because this land was the subject of the state list. So every state have their different policies, have different laws with respect to the land rights or land ownership laws. So these land laws and acts, including the Forest Right Act, Land Acquisition Act, and Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act, it provides legal frameworks for addressing land disputes and protecting tribal land rights. So we have these land laws. Forest Right Act, I had already uh, talked about in my previous slide. The Land Acquisition Act and Land Acquisition Act 2013 is there. Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dweller is there for providing them resettlement and rehabilitation when they were dispossessed from their land. So these laws outline procedures for land ownership, acquisition, redistribution, and dispute resolution, ensuring the rights and interests of tribal communities are safeguarded. Next is the role of tribal councils and local authorities in resolving the land disputes, because as we have judicial system, as we have certain laws which basically deals with in protecting or regulating the rights for these indigenous people and the tribal communities, tribal council also play an important role here in resolving the land disputes. These tribal councils, known as gram sabha or traditional village assemblies, and they play here a significant role in resolving the land disputes and managing communal land resources. These councils represent the collective voice of tribal communities and serve as forums for decision making, conflict resolution, and governance at the grassroots level. So, along with the judicial system, along with the laws, the land laws, we have the laws for the protection of the this indigenous people and the tribal community. We have certain tribal councils in every area. We have certain village assemblies, the gram sabha, which here play an important role in resolving these land disputes. And the function of these tribal council is facilitating community consultations and consensus building processes for resolving land disputes, mediating conflicts between the tribal members, neighboring communities, and external stakeholders, because sometimes it works when they mediate conflict between these tribal members, their neighboring communities, and external stakeholders. They here made a compromise between them. They bring out them together in at the same time, at the same place, in one table, in which they assist them to settle their dispute without going through the strict procedure of the court, implementing land management plans, conservation initiatives, and sustainable development projects in collaboration with local authorities. So, these are the functions, like they implement land management plans, the conservation initiatives, and sustainable development. We have then other is apart from this tribal council, we have local authorities also, which is known as local government bodies such as district administrations, revenue departments, and panchayats also play a role in resolving land disputes and enforcing land laws. They provide administrative support, legal guidance, and enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance with land related neighbors and court orders. So, apart from that, tribal council, we have this body, local government bodies, which help in resolving land disputes and land enforcing these land laws for the benefit of the indigenous people and the tribal communities in resolving their dispute, providing legal guidance, providing financial support, providing administrative support. And then we have collaborative approach. Collaborative approach, if I'm saying here, is the collaborative approach. It works for the promoting the transparency, for promoting the accountability and participation in decision making, leading to equitable outcomes and sustainable land governance. Because effective resolution of land disputes often requires a collective approach involving tribal councils, local authorities, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders. They can effectively resolve the land disputes when there is a collaborative approach between these bodies, between these tribal council, between these local authorities. They can work out in better manner when they work for society organizations, and it basically promote transparency, equality, accountability, and community participation in decision making. Now I'm talking about here the landmark court cases which are related to the tribal land rights, because our judicial system play an important role in resolving land disputes. Certain decisions, certain important judgments are there in resolving these disputes. In this we have first one is Samta versus State of Andhra Pradesh case, 1997 judgment. In this landmark case, the Supreme Court of India ruled that mineral resources which are found in scheduled areas belong to the state government but must be managed for the benefit of the tribal communities. This judgment highlighted the need for tribal consent and equitable distribution of benefits from mineral extraction projects, influencing subsequent policies on natural resource governance. So this was the landmark case where the Supreme Court held that the mineral resources which were found in these areas, it must be managed for the benefit of their welfare, for the benefit of the tribal communities or the indigenous people. It doesn't mean that if the government found the mineral resources there, so they extract the mineral resources wholly and take it for the government purposes. They have to take out for the manage for the benefit of the tribal communities. Next case is Narmada Bachao Andolan versus Union of India. Again, one of the important case in which the Supreme Court emphasized the need for comprehensive rehabilitation and resettlement measures for displaced communities, leading to the enactment of laws such as the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2013. Because this Narmada Bachao Andolan case addressed the displacement of tribal communities due to the construction of large dams on the Narmada River. Next is T.N. Gundavaram Trimulapad versus Union of India, the 2000 case judgment given by the Supreme Court. And in this case, Supreme Court issued directives to regulate forest related activities in tribal areas, including mining, logging, and commercial exploitation. So in this T.N. Godavaram case, here Supreme Court issued directives to regulate these forest related activities in tribal areas. This judgment here emphasized the protection of tribal rights and environmental conservation, influencing policies on forest governance and biodiversity conservation. Next important case in this line is Odisha Mining Corporation versus Ministry of Environment and Forest 2013 case. In this case also, the Supreme Court cancelled mining leases granted to the companies in violation of tribal and environmental laws in Odisha. This judgment, it emphasized the need for strict adherence to the environmental and tribal welfare laws in natural resource extraction projects, setting precedents for sustainable development practices. Now, what will be the impact of these on the policy and the legislation of these landmark court cases in which the Supreme Court here issued directions for the welfare of the tribal communities and the indigenous people? In this, we have the certain policy reforms, because these landmark court cases have led to significant policy reforms which aimed at protecting tribal land rights, ensuring equitable development, and promoting sustainable resource management. Governments have enacted laws formulated guidelines and established regulatory mechanisms in response to judicial rulings, enhancing legal safeguards for tribal communities. So, by this, these landmark cases, which have led to significant policy reforms, they aimed at protecting the land rights, the tribal land rights, ensuring between them the equitable development and promoting sustainable resource management. By legislative amendment here, if I will mention regarding the court judgments, which have supported legislative amendments to address gaps in existing laws and regulations governing tribal land rights, resource governance, and resettlement policies. So, these amendments to land acquisition laws, environmental regulations, and forest governance frameworks, it reflects the influence of judicial decisions on policy formulation and implementation. Because whenever the Supreme Court issues such directions, then the executive, then the legislature, they have to follow such policies, they have to formulate these policies and implement them accordingly. Community empowerment, again by these landmark court cases, they have empowered the tribal communities to assert their rights, challenge injustices, and demand accountability from government and private entities. So, these landmark court cases have also helped or have also empowered these tribal communities to assert their rights, to challenge the injustices which were done to them and demand accountability from the governments and the non-tribal community. Judicial interventions have raised awareness, mobilized support, and strengthened grassroots movements advocating for tribal land rights and social justice. Now, I will give an overview of the government programs which were there for the benefit for the welfare of these indigenous people and the tribal community. Education initiatives were taken by the government because scholarships and special schools were there to improve educational access and quality. We have Article 15 there in our constitution. Again here, the efforts were made by the government to preserve indigenous languages and cultures within the education system. Healthcare services, by providing the healthcare facilities in tribal areas. This is again one of the important steps taken by the government, one important program. Specialized programs for addressing prevalent health issues among tribal populations such as malnutrition and endemic diseases. Economic development. Financial support is also there for entrepreneurship and small-scale industries. Infrastructure development to enhance connectivity and access to markets. Training and skill development programs to promote employment opportunity. Land rights and resource management were also there made by the government for the recognition of the traditional land rights, and the efforts have been made to prevent land encroachment. Sustainable resource management initiatives including forestry and agriculture programs. Social welfare programs are also there. Housing programs to improve living conditions. Social security schemes tailored to tribal communities. For preserving their culture here, the support is there for traditional art and crafts, often through marketing assistance. Funding for cultural events, festivals, and heritage preservation projects. So, these are the important programs here made by the government for preserving the culture of the tribal community and the indigenous people. But obvious, by their efforts, by their these policies, by implementing these things, they improved education levels, healthcare access by expanded access to the healthcare services, which leading to better health outcomes. Economic empowerment, again successful entrepreneurship ventures and increased employment opportunities, it leading to economic upliftment. Land rights recognized, cultural revival is there. So, these are the points we can say that is done by the government, certain programs which are there by the government. But there are certain challenges also in implementing these things. It is not easy to provide such type of things very easily. The government have to work for it. Bureaucratic, red tape, corruption, and inefficiencies in implementing programs often hinder their effectiveness. lack of participation between the tribal communities and in program design and decision making processes. Environmental degradation is again one of the challenge because exploitation of natural resources in tribal areas without adequate safeguards, it can lead to environment degradation. Modernization and globalization pose it threats to indigenous cultures and languages, leading to cultural erosion and identity crisis among tribal communities. So, these historical marginalization and conflicts over land rights often persist, leading to social unrest and perpetuating cycles of poverty. There are certain points which are linking here land rights with sustainable development. We have certain goals, section 15 sustainable development goals is there, like no poverty. It ensures it enable indigenous community to access and control land resources, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, reduced inequalities, climate action, life on land. So these are the points here. By providing these sustainable development goals, it helps them out, or it is for basically for the welfare of the tribal people. And now I will talk about the importance of land rights for sustainable development by empowering them, by providing foundation for the economic empowerment, by poverty reduction and inclusive growth, enabling indigenous and tribal communities, by preserving their culture, by providing environmental sustainability, by providing them social justice. So this is the role of indigenous knowledge in sustainable land management, basically by contribution to sustainable land management, climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction. So these are the examples here, like agroforestry is there, terracing and soil conservation is there, fire management, community-based fisheries. The path ahead requires to protect tribals in India and safeguard their rights and well-being. Several measures and policies need to be implemented, like for their cultural preservation, for their community empowerment, land rights, awareness and sensitization between the tribal people and the indigenous people, protection of isolated tribes, providing them legal protection, inclusive development must be there, rehabilitation by providing and giving resettlement, giving good compensation if they were displaced, by giving education and providing health services, by giving opportunity for the employment. So in the last, I would like to conclude that the tribals in India are an important part of the nation, and it is essential to foster an environment where tribal communities can thrive and enjoy the same opportunities and rights as other citizens of the country. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this piece of literary snippet. We usually know William Shakespeare as the most revered figure in the history of English literature. But we often tend to forget that he has also been one of the most hated figures in literature. And here I'm not talking only about those boys and girls who have to memorize long sections from Macbeth or King Lear or Julius Caesar before they can go and sit for their school or college exams. But I'm also talking about people who are themselves quite famous authors. Tolstoy, for instance, considered the writings of Shakespeare to be, and I quote, crude, immoral, vulgar, and senseless. George Bernard Shaw absolutely loathed Shakespeare, as he did Homer. But perhaps no other criticism about Shakespeare is more damaging than the one which says that Shakespeare is a marvelous storyteller, provided someone has told him the story earlier. Now, this piece of criticism is particularly damaging because it is true. None of Shakespeare's plays contain any original story whatsoever. They are all written using pre-existing materials, pre-existing stories. Now, does that diminish the stature of Shakespeare as a dramatist? Well, I'll leave that for you to decide. See you in the next episode of Literary Snippets.